kind of explained that to me, I was like, I get it now. Okay. So because our seasons are spread differently across the year, we don't actually have biennials as such necessarily, is what I want to say there.
Well, no, the terminology biennials is just about 2 seasons. And even when you look at the Northern Hemisphere, they really only take 300 and something days. It's not 600 and something days. So the term biennials is is kind of misleading because for them it's still 2 growing seasons.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
How does everyone feel about that? Am I the only person who was like mind blown on that one?
Do you mind if I interject here? I forgot where the hand up thing is. But when we're talking about biennials as opposed to annuals, is annuals you have to plant every year, and biennials look after themselves. um, if if the growing season allows that, over a couple of growing seasons.
No, no,
No?
no, no. You are confusing eating and seed production. And you can't necessarily eat it
Oh,
in the second season because it's gone to seed. Right?
so well, I get, yeah, okay. I guess it depends on.
It's about the life cycle of the plant. It's not about how we want to deal with it in our kitchens.
Okay.
Hopefully,
Those plants don't care about what you want to.
Kathy, you and me are in the same boat, mate. Hopefully, by the end of this, we'll be
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
gotcha,
No,
gotcha.
but 100%. I understand about when you're talking about the life cycle of a plant. But when I'm thinking about when I grow things, when I grow food, I want to eat it. So I will eat bolted greens or whatever. I'll cut them up and I'll do different things with them. Yeah, so I think what I'm trying to ask, the question I'm trying to ask is, if you have if you grow something that people say is biennial, you would expect you could keep it in your garden for 2 years, 2 growing seasons, right?
Well, it depends on how you're happy to use it because I don't, unless I'm
So
seed saving. If I want to eat it, then I'm planting it again.
Ooh, let's
okay.
dive in.
No, this is the fascinating part about
Yep.
this. Absolutely fascinating part. Because if you're growing to save seed, that's a different thing than from growing to eat. Because if you eat plants that are bolted, they're still nutritious and they're still this and they're still good.
Well, some of them are. You're not going to want to eat a bolted carrot.
No, true. Very true. Very
Unless
true.
anybody's got some recipes for carrot flowers, which could be really cool.
And I'm sure there are people out there who eat bolted carrot, yeah, and do really good things with it. Yeah.
Well, let's look at the sorts of plants that we're talking about then. And maybe, Lloyd, can I draw on your vast knowledge here? Would you give us a bit of a rundown on the different types of plants that are biennials?
Okay, well, there are many plants that fall into this or that could fall into it that are sometimes seen as perennials as well. This was one of the things I just put in the chat was the huge variation and even just in day length from the top of Australia to the bottom, which is actually a big trigger for plants to flower. And obviously, which is why we ask the questions about cold and hot summers and so on, the rain patterns also significantly affect this, because they can be triggers for, as people know, you plant out things like coriander and 3 seconds of no rain, no water on it, and basically they've gone to seed already. But there's a huge range of different plants. Probably the key ones that we know about, we've already mentioned, which are things like the a lot of the ones in the Apia family, which is the parsley, celeries, and all of those kinds of plants, which are really, they're all swamp plants, and they're usually reacting to the idea of it being, flooding and then dry periods. And so they don't have enough and I guess the thing to talk about here is the reason plants become biennial generally is because their growing seasons tend to be short, for various reasons. Either they get too dry very quickly, they run out of light, they run out of food because it becomes not available because there's not enough moisture in the soil, or alternatively, there's a lot of reasons why plants become biennial as opposed to flowering in the first year that they're available. And that usually gives you a hint as to particularly where they come from and where they grow, as to what kinds of triggers are going to actually set them off to actually start their flowering period. Another one is the all of the group like the salsify and scorsonera and all those sorts of ones that are a little bit like the I guess in the kind of dandelion kind of area, that have those sorts of roots and so on, like a bit like turnips and things of that sort. You've got I'm just reading through my list. Obviously the onions, which we've talked about, which are leeks and onions, but they're very specific onions within the allium family. You've got the cabbage family, and there's a huge range of plants within that. I think that's probably a large amount of what we're talking about when we're talking about, aside from carrots, we're talking about plants that are complicated to track to actually get when they're going to flower, which is usually the second growing season after they've been in sort of a stasis or at rest for a period of time. And that's your kales, cauliflowers, and so on. And then also the other ones which are really common are the turnips, silver beets, chards, and beetroots, which all follow the same kind of pattern as well. They're all plants that, strangely enough, produce a lot of seed. Generally, then you don't really have problems producing seed from them, but they are quite complex to actually track in terms of when you plant them and when you can expect them, particularly with a cabbage, where most of your time is spent trying to create a large edible cabbage or a large leaf growth, and then to go through that process of tracking and finding out when it's going to flower, which in some cases, those tight cabbages, they have to be cut open to be able to allow them to flower with some of the varieties. There's a lot of other generally flowering plants like foxgloves, stock, mullein, linaria, all those common flowering plants that are out there that spend a lot of effort growing in the first year and then flowering in the second year. And a lot of people would be probably growing them in their garden, and in many cases not even realize that they were biennial. But I guess the main ones we're really talking about are those root vegetables, and some of the ones like parsley, celery, and definitely all of the brassicas, silver beets, and chard. Does anyone else have any other suggestions for that? I'd be interested to know what other people see as biennial plants.
I actually have a question about that, and maybe other people have a question about that too. When we're talking about biennials, are we talking about when we? And I'm coming from I grow stuff to eat it, right? So for an example is I'm never going. I love asparagus, but I'm never going to grow asparagus in my garden because it takes 2 years for me to get an asparagus. If that makes sense. So my question is, if if you're growing, not just to save seed, but to eat, how do biennials fit into that? Like, are you going to get things to eat from those, or do you have to wait? Is my question.
Hey, can I jump in on that one?
Yeah, cool.
So my favorite one that took me ages to realize before I started seed saving was actually a biennial is silver beet. And one of the reasons I love it so much is because it produces in our climate here in Canberra, it produces all year round. Like it loves winter as much as it loves a hot summer somehow. Don't know how. And it is still good to eat right up until the time that it bolts in the second season. So for me, there are some that work that way. But I saw Greg's comment in the chat just before as well that, there are some that just become completely inedible once they've bolted. I've just popped up a slide here that says, what does biennial mean in seed saving, which is the question that we're trying to kind of grapple with here. And I think we're just trying to make it like really easy to wrap our heads around. And what we put here is that plants that we ordinarily save from seeds are either annual or biennial. The annual seeds, the annual plants are the ones that set their seed in their first season of growth. So they don't kind of need an overwintering period. And for us in Australia, a lot of the stuff that we grow falls into that category. So tomatoes, lettuce, beans, peas, pumpkins, whole bunch of stuff. The biennials are the ones that set their seed in the second season of growth, and they do need a period of vernalization or overwintering. And as Lloyd was just saying there, some really common ones are, in the brassica family, onions, silver beet, and carrots. But does that mean, and here's the question for us, does that mean that biennial plants have to spend 2 years growing before they set and you can save the seed? And what we think is the answer is no. Unfortunately, all of the advice that we read on seed saving biennials comes from the Northern Hemisphere. And so we're trying to share that information about how it's different in Australia. Liz, did you have anything that you could add in terms of that seasonal idea?
I'm not sure where you've gone with this question. Are you asking me to repeat what was said before about that it's growing seasons, not actual years?
Yeah, sorry, maybe that's a bit confusing. Let's roll into the next bit. How do we do it? Let's get practical. So how do we grow biennials for the best seed? And when should you plant biennial seed? How should you grow biennial plants differently from annuals? When do they produce seed? When should it be harvested? When and how does it ripen? How do you select the best biennial plants and seed? What triggers the flowering? And how do you avoid the fast flowering or bolting plants? And how long can you store the vegetables out of the ground? Maybe it might be a good idea to throw it open and see, has anybody been saving any of the biennials and have any experience that you'd like to share?
Do you mind if I put my 10 cents worth in?
Go for it, Kathy.
Okay. In my experience, whether it's biennial or annual, I have always found success where I am. So if I plant something, then it grows, and then it goes to seed, it bolts because it doesn't like. I will still eat that, some of that, but then I find plants that bolt, they want to fly through the wind and go somewhere else. So I let them do that. And so I find what I've found just using this natural process is that my for example, my spring onions, I haven't been very successful collecting seed for spring onions, but if I just let those guys bolt, I've got spring onions everywhere forever, and I never have to buy spring onions. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, yeah, so harvesting those seeds, my plants in my yard are resistant. They're very resistant, but I find I've never had to buy spring onions. And this is one example. I've never had to buy spring onions for like 10 years because they just decide what they're going to do. And whatever I do is irrelevant, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that's helpful or.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. That's really cool. Let's pick up on one of the specific questions. How do you grow biennial plants differently from annuals or perennials? And so I think this is, from my understanding, all about timing. And about working with the plant in a different way over a longer period of time. Maybe I might throw to Liz and ask her to give us an example of carrots that she grows in the Bega Valley, to kind of take us through that process of when do you plant, how do you grow them differently, when do they produce seed, and when do you harvest it, and when and how does it ripen? You okay to take us through that, Liz?
Yeah, sure. So if I'm growing for eating, obviously we have crops in the ground already, so start about August, succession planting all the way through. If I'm taking that crop through to seed, I don't plant for that until about February. And for February is the time for me because that allows me to get a mature crop before it gets too cold for them to stop growing. And they just sit in the ground over winter for me. In fact, for everyone in Australia, none of us have the hard freezes that the Northern Hemisphere gets. And then, so I've planted in February my seed crop, and then in about July, I usually dig everything up. I will cut the tops off. I will go through and assess them all to work out which ones have got cracks or splits or forking, and I will remove from the gene pool any that don't match what I'm looking for. This includes if I'm doing something like Chantenay red cord, to cut the bottom off them to check the core color. And then I plant them all back at much bigger spacings because carrots going to seed are actually huge. And they then grow through into spring and then start sending up flower stalks in spring and early summer. And it'll be around Christmas, New Year that I will be harvesting mature seed. So less than 12 months from the beginning of the process to the end. It's a very similar process for beetroots and parsnips and any of the other root crops. Is that kind of what you were looking for, Ariane?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And Liz, when you're doing the carrots, what triggers the flowering that brings on the seeding?
Enough cold. So I don't actually have that off the top of my head, but I know we went and looked up the temperature that you had to get under, and it's on the web page that is now on the seedsaversconnect.org.au website. I can probably bring that up later. What I have found is that most of the things we grow in Australia seem to obviously have been adapted for here. I have read things from the US or even from the Seed Savers Exchange, the Art of Seed Saving book, and they say things like it needs 10 weeks under 4 degrees. That might have been beetroots or silver beets or something. There's no way I get that. There's probably no way anybody in Australia gets that because our daytime temperatures would go over that. And yet we can seed seeds. So we don't actually need the levels of cold that you might see in some of those books. But you do need some amount of cold to get them to trigger the flowering. And I know there are people in northern New South Wales and much further up who have trouble with biennials because they simply can't trigger the flowering.
Thanks, Liz. And Marianne, you've put a really great tip into the chat there. Do you want to tell us a bit about that one?
Which one?
So you've just said carrots you can take out of the soil.
Yes,
And
that is
then-
a thing our grandparents did here because of the cold winter. It was too cold for cabbage and carrots and parsley. They took it out and they put it into the cellars because we had no fridges 70 years ago. And so the cellar was cold enough to get the trigger so that they plant it back after the cold season and they start flowering. And you can do it with the fridge these days, to leave it in the fridge for a few weeks and then back into the soil again.
So such a great tip, Marianne, because we don't have a lot of luck, certainly in the area where I am. If I put some stuff into a cellar here, it'll just kind of stay lukewarm, really. So yeah, into the fridge is a great tip to use.
I have a tree here. It's called Indian banana tree. It's from North America. And the seed harvest is now in autumn here. And I've always put the seeds into sand. It's not dry. It's a little bit, what is it? Humid, the sand. And I put it into my fridge until I'm back from Australia in March. And then I put it into soil. And then after 9 months, the seed starts growing. So it needs the cold winter from Northern America. It works.
Can I just say one thing? That's what's really interesting about this discussion within the Australian context. Does anyone here have a root cellar? Because it's really not something that I don't know anyone who does that sort of Northern Hemisphere cold climate type of processes, even within seed saving. And I think this is one of the big problems that we have, because a lot of information we get talks about even Northern Hemisphere varieties and so on. And so I think one of the really important things is about, particularly with the connections with our seed saver groups, is a key thing is to actually look for varieties that local people are growing in your area, which is really dramatically important for learning about what will grow without those sort of temperature variations, because you can get huge variations. Another classic example of this is day length really affects the area that we're not talking about is alliums, but that's one where you have such a huge variation in available varieties depending on the day length that you actually have during winter and summer and how it changes. And that change from long days to short days is actually what triggers a lot of the flowering processes in many plants. Particularly alliums are really sensitive to that, and they're even more sensitive to that than the actual process of being exposed to cold. So that's why we're not talking about them, because they're a little bit more complex. But the point is that learning about the varieties that you can grow in your area, the huge variation between even really simple things like carrots that will grow in Queensland and up in the north, and carrots that will grow down in Tasmania and Victoria, even the difference between the carrots that you can grow in central New South Wales and Victoria are quite different, just simply because of some of those other features to do with the idea of it. And what that means is that because we don't follow that Northern Hemisphere process of taking them out of the ground to save them during the winter period or cool period and putting them in, or for example in Queensland, taking things out of the ground during the wet period to avoid them getting destroyed by mold and fungi and all those sorts of things. We have quite different practices, but the thing is that the process of doing it for example, selecting what is good seed then becomes an interesting question, because what we're looking for is carrots, for example, that will hold and continue to grow after they've been in stasis when you've put them through that cold period. You've grown the carrot, it goes kind of pulls back down into the root and then starts growing for the following period. The tricky part is that in many of our climates, that the dryness and the heat really kind of kill those tubers while they're in the ground, and you have a lot of problems. And I think the way that we can get around it in Australia, particularly, is by doing exactly what they do in the Northern Hemisphere, which is pull your carrots out, have a look at them, but replant them pretty much immediately in the ground once you've selected the ones that you want. And when it's a really mind-blowing thing when you start doing that with seed saving, you actually pull a vegetable out of the ground and look at it and say, is it the right shape? Is it branching? Is it has it got the right color? Has it got too many little kind of weird hairs on it? Is it bumpy? Is it the right color? And then to put that back in the ground is a really huge step, I think, in the process of learning about seed saving, because it's quite a complex process. And I think particularly with the tuber vegetables, it's something that we just don't identify with because we tend to actually have such good growing conditions for getting the first part of the growing to the tuber stage, that it's very difficult. I mean, I don't know what other people think about that, but I think that that's one example of, I don't know anyone who does that where they take it out to store it to avoid it being damaged, except where it's likely to get extremely wet and rot, possibly. But we don't have to do it because of the cold. I'm not sure. Maybe people in the west coast of Tasmania do it. I'm not sure because it's pretty cold down there.
I saw that, thanks, Lloyd. I saw that Robin has her hand up. But can I just say, would it make sense to pull it out of the ground and put it into the fridge if you need the space in the garden and then replant afterwards? I've got Greg's hand up. Greg, did you have something on that particular question?
Yeah, if I want to get carrots, so to sort these ones that I pulled today, then I'll take those and do a selection for the characteristics I want from those and pop them in the fridge for a month or so. And then I can replant those in December and then probably get a seed crop off them this year. And I planted those in July, I think. So it is possible to accelerate it and get some seeds off stuff within 12 months if you really want to go through the process of making what's called a steckling and refrigerating it and checking that they don't go rotten and then trying to get the seed off them.
Cool. Thanks, Greg.
You're giving up gardens. I mean, you're giving up fridge space for garden space. And I think for most of us, it's probably cheaper to have garden space than fridge space.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Robin, you had your hand up.
Yes, it was interesting that you talked about refrigeration. As a child, my father used to dig them up, put them in a hessian bag, and then bury them again. We didn't have fridge space, but I didn't know until just now that he was actually saving his seeds because he used to plant some of them. I didn't take any notice, but yeah, so we didn't have a cellar, but he used to dig a hole. I'm on the northwest coast of Tasmania, near Devonport. Lots of vegetable growing here. We've got heaps of food area. So, but obviously they don't save their seeds like that. But yeah, my father used to do it. And suddenly I've now got an answer. Thank you.
That's fabulous. Thanks, Robin. Very cool. Does anybody have anybody else growing any carrots for seed and can tell us a bit about how you do it and your timing and how it works out for you?
I'll just jump in and add one more comment that I said I planted them in February because then they would get full size before winter in my climate, and when winter starts here. But you do need to get things to a level of maturity before they will before going cold, will form a flower. And so if Greg wasn't putting those ones planted in June or July, if I had done that here, they probably would have grown very slowly at the beginning, and then been warm at the point they reached the level of maturity. So to make them go to seed, I would have had to put them in the freezer, for fridge, sorry, not freezer. That would kill them. Because even though they were cold at the beginning, they wouldn't be mature enough before that.
Thanks, Liz. So really important point about biennial seed saving is to factor in the timing to maturity, so that you can actually get seeds from mature plants. Eve, you've popped a link in the chat there. Would you tell us a little bit about what that's about? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Eve.
Yeah, sorry, actually, it was not intentional, just an accident. But I wanted to say something which I experimented with in terms of, for example, parsnips. I found that I had very little success buying seeds, commercial seeds that were within the use by date. And finally, last year, I had one parsnip that managed to grow. So I set the seeds and I did a comparison in autumn, and found that I saw some of the seeds that I collected, and the other half I bought another new packet of parsnip seeds and found that I had zero success with the purchased seeds, and the seed that I had collected germinated very well and are growing very well. And I just wonder if it is, and I've spoken with people around and I've had many comments, similar, or many observations similar to the one I have made. And I've had also some challenges with carrots, which I don't quite understand. And I wonder whether people have had the same experience with commercial seeds not being really viable, even though they are within the use by dates.
Thanks, Eve. Let's throw that open. Has anybody had an experience similar to that? I've got Greg and Liz. Liz, go fire away.
Yeah, I'm going to say definitely. We buy in quite a bit of seed. And if there's something that I really want, I try to buy it the same variety from 2 different suppliers. And I can't even say that one supplier is better than another. It seems to be very random. Like one thing won't work from someone one year, but all the rest of their stuff is beautiful. And then the next year it'll be some other supplier that randomly has a few things that don't work, but did work the previous year. Look, I don't know. I find it quite frustrating. And hence I spend more money on seed than I probably need to.
Thanks, Liz. Greg next and then Lloyd.
There's a couple of issues there. I was chatting to Steve Solomon a month or so ago, and he ran a seed business in the States, and he basically said the message he got from the wholesalers was to the retailers of seed, don't bother about the quality because home gardeners always blame themselves rather than the seed. So they put anything they like into the packets. So that could be one of your issues. The other thing is parsnip seed is said to crash like after about 18 months or 2 years, but I've grown 8-year-old parsnip seed with low germination, but it's still germinated. But that was seed I collected myself. It was high quality. I stored it in a fridge. So if you get high quality seed, then you can get more life out of it than you would expect, but you've got to look after it. It's alive. But yeah, I've also bought packets of parsnip seed and had zero germination.
Thanks, Greg. And I just want to support this point in particular about parsnip seed. Definitely had troubles keeping it for very long at all, and support Marina's point that she's made in the chat, Marina from Melbourne, about a friend saying that, you know, parsnip basically is going to grow best when it just falls off the plant and plants itself and starts all over again. Lloyd, over to you.
That's what I was going to say. One of the things that I definitely say with parsnip, it's a mysterious plant. But there's quite a lot of other plants in that whole group or that whole family actually that do the same thing. One of the things that you hear about, I do a lot of kind of visits to various different seed groups and things like that, and garden groups, and everyone always says that basically with celery, parsnip, and parsley, but particularly parsley, that their best stuff always germinates with absolutely no problem when they actually just let the seed fall. And there are some interesting things to do with that, like parsnips are like an odd one, but because it does seem to drop off really quickly in terms of you know, viability. But there are some seeds which people, particularly home gardeners, think that they're actually failing at, where there are a number of them, like parsley, which basically actually needs a period of time of up to 2 to 3 months of waiting before it will actually germinate. So there are a lot of seeds that have really peculiar, and I think that's got to do with the origin, where they're actually river plants or swamp plants, where basically they fall off the plant and they don't want to germinate just anywhere. They basically wait for a couple of months for the rains to return or the wet period to return and whatever. And particularly with parsley, I know that there's a 2 to 3 month waiting period. So if you try to grow fresh seed, and likewise, even with chili seeds, for example, if you a classic example that works with it as well, that if you get chili seeds and a lot of the other solanums for that matter, that if you dry them and desiccate them down to around about 12%, then you'll get like 99% germination rate. But if you try to plant a fresh one that hasn't been dried, you get like 5% germination. So there's also strange things to do with, I think, their origins, which basically follow through with a lot of other types of seeds. And the other thing to say is that with majority of most of the seed grown from other people, which again, I think seed saver groups are the best place to actually get this, or locals, is because you have no idea how long that stuff's been warehoused. And a lot of seed that we get is imported from other locations like South Africa, Portugal, which have completely and utterly different patterns. And you have no idea, is the year, when does their year start? Is it by actual date, in the middle of winter, in the middle of summer? And so you've got all those sort of complications that happen with it as well. But even seed, particularly from parsnip, that's handed on to people, in our group, we usually have 1 year. We do put it up with a lot of the alliums and onions and so on, that basically maximum of a year, and then basically from then on you just biff it on the ground on the garden and hope that something happens, because it's unlikely to happen after about a year. Just my comments on it.
Thanks, Lloyd. And I think there's a strong theme going through here of the thing that we all know, and probably one of the main reasons that we're involved in seed saving, is that the seed that you grow locally, that like is used to your climate, that has grown in your climate, that understands how your seasons work, is just going to be better. And as Greg said, you can push it further, and it's more likely to come good for you. Greg, I take your point. Parsnip recruits are one of the most annoying weeds in your garden. I wish I had that problem. Does anybody else have anything to kind of weigh in on there? We had some other questions that we might want to talk about, flowing on from the what triggers flowering.
Can I interrupt?
Yep. Sorry, go for it.
Apologies. Can I interrupt? I have a question. And we've got a whole pile of experts here, so this is the right medium to ask this question. I know some things, and I'm talking about growing for food, not growing for seed right now, but all right, I have a whole lot of garden beds. And I took all my compost that wasn't quite ready, just yet. And I placed it all on these compost beds. And now I'm getting all of these things like tomatoes, chilies, cucumbers, pumpkins, all kinds of things that were in the compost, right? Which makes me happy. And I don't know about anyone else who's growing out there, but I have this real feeling that plants that choose to come will be vibrant and will give you produce. Plants that we muck around with their genetics and stuff might be a little bit princessy and may germinate or may not. Do you know what I mean? I'm just asking this question to the group as a grower, and I grow for business, but I also grow for eating, for me to eat. So I just wonder how other people feel about that. And if, yeah, hope that made sense.
Thanks, Kathy. Does anybody have anything to weigh in on there? I'm with Lloyd in the comments on this. Free food. That's fantastic. That's really cool. Marina down in Melbourne says volunteer plants are great, only move them if they're in the wrong place. And also growing lots to try and eat, and focused on that. Does anybody have any thoughts on how you avoid the fast flowering or bolting of plants, particularly the biennials?
I'd like to ask, sorry to interrupt, I'd like to ask, why do we care about bolting? If you're growing things to eat, why do we care about bolting? Because we can eat all of that too.
That's such a great question. Such a great question, Kathy. Yeah, let's get into that, because by saying how do we stop them from bolting, we are assuming that bolting is a bad thing. So why is it, as seed savers, that we don't want bolting? Liz, I think you're...
Yeah, I'm champing at this one because I don't want to eat those, Kathy. I know you said earlier you did, but I don't think they taste as good. The root vegetables, they're carrots and all the rest of them, are going to be woody and horrible. And I do want to eat, and I want to eat them over the longest period. So when I said I put a whole lot of carrots in February, and from that I get my seed crop, I'm also putting in a lot at that point, because that's the carrots that we eat all the way through winter, because they don't keep growing. I'm in a cold area. Once they're mature, they sit in the ground and we can harvest them for months. I want them to stay harvestable for the longest period possible before they bolt to seed. So as soon as if there's some that go to seed early, they're no longer food for me. So I don't want that in the gene pool. I would be removing them and trying to save my seed from the ones that hold the longest in the garden, for those things like carrots and beetroots and even silver beet, because, once they've bolted, the leaves are getting smaller and I'm getting less food from them.
Don't you find though, Liz, when you're talking about chard or silver beet, if you just chop it off, they'll just keep growing and the leaves will get bigger? That's what I find in my garden.
You can do that for a certain amount,
Yeah,
but also I'm feeding 3 households.
So you need
we want box loads of veggies every week.
Yeah, cool beans.
And we don't want to faff around too much. And it's all the veggies for those households. So it's not just a little bit on the side. It's not opportunistic.
Yeah. Okay.
And I want that silver peat to last as long as possible, because right now we're actually in what we call a hungry gap. Winter crops have bolted to seed.
Yeah.
Our summer crops are not big enough yet, because it's frosty to the end. So now is actually the hardest time for me to put vegetables on the table. We've got, peas and asparagus and lettuce and other greens, but all the major things have bolted, or they're not here yet.
I'm finding exactly the same thing here in my garden, because it's been really cold and then it's been hot, and the plants are confused. So they just want to spread some seed. Yeah.
I don't think they're confused. We've gone from cold to hot. They've gone through their vernalization. That's completely normal. It's what they should be doing.
I can see, thanks, Liz. Thanks, Kathy. I can see that Greg's got his hand up, but just wanted to point out a couple of comments in the chat as well. I do have sometimes plants that bolt, and for seed saving, that's not great, as Liz is saying, for the genetic reason. As seed savers, what we're trying to do is breed plants that will behave the way we want them to behave in future seasons. But just to support that point, that when things do go wrong and you get a bolt, there are alternative crops that you can get from it as well. So flowers and seeds can be in themselves edible crops. Greg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons on why you might not want bolting. So if you've got carrots, for example, and they bolt on you in the first year, then they're going to be woody and they're not going to be edible as carrots. And they're not the genetics that you want to carry forward into your seed crop for everyone else, because they're just going to be growing carrots that you can only eat in the first couple of months, and then they turn to wood because they're going to get a woody core when they throw up their flower spike. Ditto onions. You're not going to get an edible bulb from an onion that bolts in the first year, so you don't want that in your seed crop, so you probably want to chuck it out. In terms of delaying bolting, you might want to do it, particularly if you're doing population breeding, in which case you might want everything to be flowering at the same time so that the things will actually cross-pollinate. But if they have staggered flowering, you're not going to get that crossing between the two varieties or three varieties or four varieties that you want. So finding ways to delay bolting can be important. So you could possibly do it by covering plants up and hiding them in the dark for a bit to change the photoperiod, or use external grow lights to change the day length, or put them in a little hothouse or something. Depends specifically on what's triggering the flowering for that particular plant. But there are a few approaches you can use to try and synchronize flowering in a population crop.
Thanks, Greg. And that my notes tell me here we did a bit of a list of the different things that can cause trigger flowering in the different crops, particularly the biennials. So the cold weather, as Liz was talking about before, can be an important aspect to make sure that you do get flowers at the right time. But I've also got in my notes here, heat and drought can obviously cause bolting, and we probably all know that from coriander, which is in a different category, but certainly something that happens a lot in Canberra. Varietal susceptibility, so some varieties are just going to be more susceptible to flowering and to bolting. Planting time, so being careful with your planting times. Over-fertilizing, disturbed soil. Is there anything else that's missing from that list, do you think?
No, but
Day length is that's a big bug with me. Basically, plants there are many plants that definitely sprout and change simply not just by exposure to light, but the length of light, and it's not the actual day length, but it's the change of the day length that actually makes them grow or flower. A classic example is if you go into the complexities of garlic growing, and seed production is different from the flowering trigger and bulb production triggers as well. So in many plants, you can actually get multiple triggers all happening at the same time. I mean, a weird one is brassicas, where cauliflowers uniquely start flowering not from cold, although they will be affected by cold, but they primarily actually flower based on day length. And it's a really odd one because there's only 2 or 3 of the brassicas that do it, but they actually are triggered by day length, not by the cold process primarily. So there's a whole lot of different things with day length. And you know that with even, for example, with the process of being some seeds that are exposed to light and that will actually germinate based on changing day length as well.
Thanks, Lloyd. Liz?
I was going to go there with the drought thing because Lloyd and I have previously had discussions about this. So I think it's actually worth talking about because different people have different approaches to this. And so, yes, the drought can trigger flowering, but I would argue that's a really bad thing to do as a seed saver because now you can't tell whether it genetically is a bolter or whether you forced it from drought, if that makes sense. And that it would be better, you would get better, stronger seed from something that was getting appropriate water because the plants would have more nutrition and water and be able to form better seed.
The question there is whether it actually changes it genetically, whether that seed, if, for example, if you have early bolting coriander and you plant it, you collect that seed and you plant it again and you do it for 3 or 4 years, are you likely to ever get something that doesn't bolt early? And that's really the tricky part about that, because there are some seeds which I think you can actually allow for some of those variations, but you know, like where something bolts a little bit earlier than it did the previous year. Yeah, my argument would be that occasionally that happening is not going to affect it as much as, for example, repeatedly doing that every year, where you get something which theoretically adjusts to drought, but in fact actually changes its whole growing cycle effectively, which I think is useless to us because it just doesn't grow. All it grows is really, small plants that actually have limited leaf and generally don't actually taste very good because they've already been triggered and they chemically change and their whole system changes to something different. So, don't know.
Lloyd, you got a thumbs up from Liz there. Liz, was that a thumbs up?
Yep, I agree with that. It's about that. It's about whether you're doing it as your always technique versus just happening occasionally.
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about at Canberra Seed Savers is the importance of sharing genetics and making it as easy and accessible as possible for people to start seed saving, and including a gradual process of education and development of skills and expertise. So we kind of think one season of a carrot flowering early is not the end of that seed, but we do encourage people not to continue to save from early bolters in their own garden and replant that seed year on year on year because of those risks that you guys are talking about. Does anybody want to chuck anything else in on that question of bolting and early flowering? What's your experience been?
I'm ruthless. I pull them out.
Okay. Love it, Liz. Thanks.
Yes, if a plant isn't going to thrive, get rid of it. I'm 100% with you. Yeah.
Rightio. So I think we talked a little bit about this before, but we did have a question here about, do you have to lift and store biennials over winter? And I think we've probably dealt with that one. So I want to throw it open a bit and just ask, what questions do people have about biennials that they'd like us to kind of draw on our massive brains trust here of all of us together and see if we can resolve?
Could I could I start the question process off? Is that okay?
Yep, go for it, Kathy.
Yeah, cool beans. I had a bumper chili crop last year. Never had a bumper chili crop for the last probably 5 years. And I was harvesting chilies way into the frost season, and then the frost got the chili plant and it died. And someone I was talking to a little while back said, chili plants, if you put them, well, for our climate anyway, if you put them in a pot, like when it starts to get cold, if you put them into a pot and put them somewhere protected, then you'll have chilies over the winter period. So my question about what we're talking about, are chilies annual or biannual, or what do people think about that?
They're perennial, Kathy, except that most of us are in too cold a climate and we grow them as annuals.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, some people up here in Canberra were saying they have success with chili plants that keep going on and on and on, as long as they keep them out of the frost.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Because they're not frost hardy.
Mm.
But people in Queensland would be able to just keep growing them.
There are some species that are much more cold hardy than others, like some of the cardam varieties, which will go through winters much easier and they don't tend to slow down. Like some of the chinennes and the annuum ones tend to slow down during winter, but there's a couple of different other species that are actually mixed in there that actually handle winter much better. But I can grow some of them repeatedly, perennially here in Katoomba, up at the top of the mountains, and they will continue to grow right the way through. And they tend to be bigger, more robust plants as well. So it's worthwhile looking around at actually the specific species and varieties that are designed for colder climates.
Yeah, good tip. Thank you.
Thanks, Lloyd, and thanks, Kathy. Somebody mentioned just before the Seed Savers Connect website, and I'm just going to share my screen now to show what we're talking about. So this group who are coordinating these Zooms that we're doing, what we're trying to do is to gather the wisdom and the knowledge that we all have across Australia in our different climates, which can vary a lot, across Australia, and to really build a bank of amazing information for people to be able to draw on, rather than needing to just rely on information from the Northern Hemisphere. And so hopefully everyone can see here, I've got the Seed Savers Connect website open. Can you guys all see that? Yep, seeing a couple of nods, good. So I did a bit of a search on the site for biennial, and it's brought up all of these amazing guides that we have here. You'll see that we've got stuff about carrots and parsnips and beetroot and silver beet. And I just want to thank Liz and Lloyd in particular for their amazing work on producing all of that and posting it up there, and to make sure that everybody knows that this is a resource that you can go to, look at and draw on if you've got more questions about this. Has anybody got any other questions about seed saving from biennials that we haven't touched on so far? If you stick your hand up either visibly or as like a, Zoom hand, I'll be able to see. Okay, cool. No worries. So we've had a bit of a free-form conversation there, but we've ranged across some really important points, some rules of thumb, I guess, for biennials. They need to overwinter in the cold temperatures. And we haven't even yet really talked about what do you do if you're in like a not cold temperature. So what do you do in the tropics? Whole other question, and I will chuck that one out for people to answer in a second. But they need to overwinter. They need a bit of cold. If your ground doesn't freeze in the winter, and we don't think anywhere in Australia freezes enough in the winter for this to be a problem, but if your ground doesn't freeze in the winter, you can leave the plants in where they are, just let them go. You pull them out, have a look at them, make sure they're good, or test them, make sure they're good, but just let them grow across the winter. We haven't talked yet about the fact that biennials tend to be outcrosses and need large populations to grow with. So I might just chuck that one out there and see if there's any comments from the group. When you're saving, particularly from brassicas or carrots, do you think that you need to save from large populations?
Yes.
What does large population mean to you?
Depends on what it is. If we're talking about carrots, which are involved on prairies in quite large populations, then larger populations are needed. I think if you go to that thing on the website, we've talked about those. It's a minimum of 20. I have read some other resources which say 200 would be really good. But other things don't need quite that scale. Some of the brassicas are self-incompatible, so you're going to have to start with 5 to make sure that you're getting good cross-pollination. But more is better.
Liz, what does self-incompatible mean there?
It means that the pollen from that plant cannot fertilize flowers that are also on that plant.
Yeah.
Not even the same flower, but other flowers on that plant.
Yeah. So they've got to have friends.
They have to have a distinct, genetically different plant.
Does that mean they're just tired or something? I don't understand what that means.
Sorry, I missed what you said, Kathy.
Oh,
Are they what?
Are they tired? Or is there something that's missing? Like, why is that the case?
It depends on the particular thing as to what the mechanism that stops them self-pollinating.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly what it is for things like broccoli, but I can remember that's one of the ones that they can't pollinate themselves.
It's just the way they are.
It's quite amazing that we can find broccoli in every supermarket, and it's so hard to grow, and it doesn't belong here. So, yeah. Anyway.
So Greg, you've raised your hand.
The self-incompatibility is so that you end up with diverse genetics in the population, and it stops inbreeding depression like you get with Labradors and Rhodesian Ridgebacks and all those other dogs and stuff that end up inbred with nasty diseases. And the same thing can happen with certain vegetable types. And there can be a range of different incompatibilities, either they're pollen incompatible or other things. So it's a bit complicated. The smartest thing is just to grow a lot. And if you can't do it over 1 year, do it over 2 years or 3 years, and then pool those seeds so that in the 4th year, you're planting from the whole genetic group again. So plant 5 1 year, 5 the next year, 5 the next year. You've then got 15 different plants, and then pool all that stuff for your ongoing seed pool. Or grow with friends.
I was going to say, Greg, that's the theory that we use at Canberra Seed Savers, is everyone brings in what they've got. We mix it up and send it out again on that basis of trying to mix up the genetics as much as possible without anybody having to plant an entire garden of carrots at any particular point in time. Okay, cool. So we have ranged across a lot in that discussion. We've hit 6:30. As expected, it's a big topic. and there's a lot to talk about. Is there anything that anybody wanted to chuck in or feel like we've missed, or wisdom that you'd like to share, or just an experience you'd like to share at this point?
I just wanted to say thank you, because I've learned a lot in the last hour and a half, and thank you for sharing, all the people that were comfortable to do so.
Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate all your questions. It's really great to have involvement and discussion. Lloyd's posted a good question in the chat there, and I think this is a great one for us to finish up with. We're trying to work out ways to run this Zoom that will be interesting for people and engaging, and give you the maximum opportunity to share what you know, and also to learn interesting stuff. Have people found this particular approach to the Zoom to be useful? And do you have any thoughts on that? Thank you, Marianne. Marianne says that she's learned a lot, which is great.
Yeah, can I just, Marianne, kudos to you. Do you mind if I just put my 10 cents worth in? When I first started attending these Zooms, it was I was like a local seed saver, so I felt like I didn't know anything, and I was just following instructions. And then I went to this national Zoom, and I went, oh my God, I don't know anything. Like, and I've kept coming because I'm learning so much. But I think in my experience, everybody's experience is valued in this space. And just tell us what you know. Tell us what your experience is. That's a lot of people are silent and they're listening because they're looking for the next piece of wisdom or something about seed saving. I reckon all the people that come on here every time, you have wisdom about seed saving, so share it. Like, let us know what you're doing. Like, I want people to tell me to shut up because everybody on here has wisdom about seed saving. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you. That's a really great note for us to finish up on. I did see a couple of people say that they find this structure useful. There's a question there about whether people would prefer a structure where we have guest speakers, and whether that's something that people prefer. Maybe what we should do is ask when we send out our next email, and see what everybody has to say about structure and format for upcoming Zooms, and also for topics. Liz has reminded me that the next session is the first Sunday in February. We do these on a quarterly basis. And I did just see somebody was saying that it's been useful, would be great to get into onions, so maybe that is a good a good topic for our next discussion. And also that Lydia says, thanks for the talk, good to hear from folk with experience. And Eve says it would be interesting to explore what could be done to raise the standard of companies providing seeds here. So we can do it ourselves. Let's beat them at it. So guest speakers are good too, is another vote that we've got. So let's leave it there for now, if everyone's happy, and come back to our next one. We will send out an email in the next couple of weeks as a bit of a wrap up, and also calling for ideas about topics for discussion, but also ideas that you might have for guest speakers who could come onto the Zoom. And also a call of interest if you want to be a guest speaker on our Zoom. So as Kathy's saying there, we've all got unique experiences and unique expertise, and the consistent feedback that we get from these Zooms is that people love hearing other people's stories about what they're doing. And so please do let us know if there's something that you'd like to discuss. All right, might wrap it up there. Thanks for your time, everyone, and hope that you have a fantastic rest of spring. And look out for the email from us, and please, respond to us. Let us know if there's a topic that you've got, if you'd like to be a speaker, or if you'd like to help us to organise these Zooms. We really, really appreciate any help that people might want to offer. Our email address is hello@seedsavers.org.au. Cool. Happy growing, everyone. Happy seed saving.
Bye-bye.